Hello, this is John Kranz with Ingentis. It's a pleasure to be here today with you, and we're going to be discussing in this enabler session, achieving organizational effectiveness through organizational change. So let's go ahead and get started. So today's agenda is going to focus on how to go about driving informed decisions for organizational change, how we're going to be using org charting based on actionable insights that we gain with the data that we're using to make change at the organizational level, and how we can model out these changes to have a higher level of success. So the whole goal here is to arm leaders and HR to be able to drive these informed decisions around organizational change that's needed in the organization. And no better way to do that than to add a modeling component to that effort, where you can really manage and understand and measure the types of changes you're looking to make to the organization, and to make sure those are the type of changes that need to be made in the workplace. So it's really understanding how to analyze and which HCM data is going to become important to us when it comes to organizational change to help us drive those decisions. So we've done a white paper actually around organizational design, why it's important. And again, organizational design gets into that next phase, which is organizations change all the time. It could be for internal reasons, external reasons, but there's always change happening at the organizational level in order to optimize the effectiveness of the organization. When there's new goals that need to be achieved, new business goals, new revenue targets, mergers and acquisitions, etc., that's going to change those goals for the organization. And also it's going to be an outline of the people strategy. And that really behooves us to make sure we have the right data available as HR business leaders, so we can model out the changes we need to make in order to execute our workforce plans and to execute our people strategy. So again, if you go to our virtual booth, you'll find a white paper on organizational design and modeling, which I highly recommend. So we're going to talk about driving organizational change through modeling. And again, we want to focus in on what data elements are important, what type of analytics needs to be uncovered in order to be beneficial, to understand how to make these changes that are going to help us achieve our goals in the workplace, how we can best execute our people strategy. So again, the goal is to start, we need to have a very clear line of sight into what our organizational structure looks like today. So we're going to require measurements. We're going to require HR measurements around headcount, around total comp. It could get into skills, tenure with organization, job levels, etc. All these things are going to become important to make sure we understand the current makeup of our organization in order to conduct some modeling. Just to give you one example or story around some organizational change that happens to help with organizational effectiveness. And that is when we have organizations that have certain job levels. One type of analysis that can be done is look at the job levels and look at where they are located in the hierarchy of the org structure. If you have certain job levels that are too low in the hierarchy, or perhaps they're misreporting to job levels that are below them, that would be an example where the job levels are not quite properly placed in the organizational structure where they should be. So you can do analytics or analysis around the job levels. Make sure they're at the appropriate levels. Usually as you go down in the organization, the lower the level as you go. Also, you're looking at span of control and headcount metrics as another key measurement. Again, as you go down in the organization structure, typically you're going to have more employees at each level until you get to the bottom, because for certain organizations, only certain departments might go an extra layer deep, might need that extra layer of management. So your organizational structure, it's going to grow as you go down the structure, but at the very bottom, it could just have some trailing departments with an additional level of management and a lower headcount overall. But then you need to understand where that's happening. In other words, is that additional layer of structure really needed? Yes or no? Or does it need to be added somewhere else in case there's too many direct reports for certain managers? So that's an example where you're taking the data that you have, but you need to present it in a certain way so you can have actionable insights to undergo a needed change. So It's very well reported already. Various surveys with top executives, top companies throughout domestically and worldwide, that organizational change is very difficult. So depending on how the goals are set, surveys we've seen largely say that there's clear failure for organizational change at about half the time. So obviously that's a sobering statistic that organizational change is so difficult. And just as a primer here, when we are looking to make organizational changes and what data we need to work with and what the situation is, these situations are going to be changing all the time. It could depend for the organization what industry they're in. Is it a very dynamic industry? What outside factors are at play? What competitive factors are at play? The culture of the organization overall. But again, it's constant. Change is going to be constant. Once you have your org design set and your people strategy, you're always going to see changes happening naturally and in a constant fashion. But also it could be event driven. I mentioned again, mergers and acquisitions, or a lot of organizations have had to deal with very disruptive times with the pandemic, where they've had to consider employee furloughs, early retirements, major adjustments very quickly, needing to make adjustments very quickly to save cost. So that's where modeling is going to be coming in terms of how can we arm leaders and HR professionals to be positioned for success when there needs to be change happening, so you can have those data points available. They need to be measurable data points, and that you can quickly prototype change that is needed so you can then execute on those changes. But again, a very complex topic. So organizational modeling is absolutely key to drive success for the people strategy or business strategy. So we've got all these analytics and trends that we understand already that we're getting for an organization. We're going to have certain strategies that we're going to want to execute. For example, perhaps investing in a larger sales force for certain areas, possible mergers and acquisitions, possible divestitures. So all these things are happening with the analytics that we're doing behind the scenes and the workforce planning. But once that work is done, once you have your workforce plans in place, we need to take a certain amount of data to do modeling. And modeling is important because we need to understand how are we going to execute change at the organizational level. In other words, it's all about change. It's all around the needed change that's been decided. It could come from your workforce plans, for example, as I mentioned, for changes in staffing, changes in focus. But how are you going to execute those changes, and how do you measure that change to make sure it's in line with your overall people strategy? That's where we're going to talk about certain data elements to help you drive informed business decisions, which we'll see here in a moment. We're going to talk about the data we want to arm the leaders with to make sure they can drive and measure the change that needs to be made. So what we'd like to come up with to talk about this data is a minimal viable plan. So in most modeling exercises around the people strategy or the workforce or the work designs and workforce plans that have been put into place, is we need certain elements of data to understand how to make this change through modeling. We definitely need headcount metrics. I talked about that briefly, that story about certain job levels not being in the right place. Also, you can have too many direct reports in certain areas and try to balance that out. Also balance out the number of layers in an organization if that needs to happen. So you're going to definitely always want to have a clear line of sight into headcount metrics, including design changes. You need to identify particular departments that might require more attention. So being able to focus in on certain departments, to be able to really focus in certain areas, is really critical. So we want to be able to present data in a way that it could be siloed with certain levels of focus depending on what's needed. Obviously, you want to have financial data, very important financial data for organizational change again. So we want to know all about total comp and how the roll-ups look for departments. And if we're adding staff or removing staff, offering early retirements, what's the one-time charge for that? Having to unfortunately furlough or perhaps even do a reduction in force. What's the one-time cost to do that? What about recovery from disruptive times, which is happening now for companies needing to staff back up? How do we go about that? So we need all these data points. We need to make sure all these data points are available as a minimal viable plan. So it's going to be financial data for measurements. It's going to be headcount metric data. It's going to be skills and performance ratings and time with company data to make sure we're retaining the right talent at the right time. All these data factors come into play that need to be available to us to help drive these changes that we can model. And this is what it's all about. There's a lot of data out there, and I've tried to minimize the approach, a minimal viable plan, just certain data elements and how critical they are to model change. And here's the questions that you want to be in position to be able to answer. This is what's going to help leaders drive change, is you need to have a clear measurement of your org structure today versus what that future org structure needs to look like based on your people strategy and workforce designs or plans that have been completed. You want to be able to define and measure actions that need to be taken. So if a certain department needs a 10% increase in sales headcount, how do you model that out? What's that going to look like? What's the timing of those new positions? What's the budget impact for those new positions? All that needs to be modeled out. And who do we put into those positions? Do we have talent from within that we can move into those positions? Or do we need to engage our recruiting team? And again, it's all about being productive overall as an organization to be able to do this rapid prototyping and modeling to make this change based on informed business decisions, based on known measurements and metrics. So how quickly can you add or modify your positions and employees? That's all going to be part of the modeling the plan, modeling the change. A lot of companies model changes in phases. Phase 1, what happens phase 1? What happens phase 2? What are the costs and measurements behind that and the headcount impact behind those things? We want to be able to model all of that. Who are going to be our new leaders? That's another example, a clear example. We don't want to lose talent when we make change. We want to put the right talent in the right position. We want to position people for success to be most productive. Where are departments over budget? Where are we still under budget, under goal with staffing? All these, again, it's going back to measurable items with our data based on that minimal viable plan I talked about earlier from our workforce plans. So let's do a quick demonstration of organizational modeling. You can see here from the screenshot, I've got some financial data on the left. I've got some headcount data on the left. In the middle, our main view, we've got the org chart where we can drag and drop, make changes, add new positions, add new departments, change reporting relationships. And off to the right here, we have very detailed spans and layer statistics and analysis to really do a deep dive understanding of that data to make sure we're making informed decisions about the type of changes we're looking to make. So let's go ahead now and let's take a quick look. And we're going to do a rather pretty straightforward, simple demonstration here. I'm actually just going to refresh my screen just for a moment, and let's actually focus in on the screen here. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show two levels of this org structure. This is what this is doing. It's taking a snapshot of the data that we have for the organization. And I mentioned that minimal viable plan is represented here. We have financial data in terms of total compensation of our departments and individuals, so we can see total comp for individuals as well as the total comp roll-ups for departments, because financial impact is going to be very important. And then each departmental box and each manager has headcount metrics. We have the number of direct reports, the total number of reports for the entire span of control, and the total position count. So again, minimal viable plan. What data do we want to make sure leaders have available when they need to plan and undergo organizational change? How can we measure to make sure we're doing these changes properly? These are examples around financial data and measurable headcount data that we want to be able to understand better as we make change. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to start a new model. So what we've done effectively is we've taken what we absolutely have to have is a current snapshot of our org structure today. And then we know based on our workforce plans, what's the goal? What's the goal that we're going to be moving towards? And let's say our goal was to increase staffing for the production US department, but for the QA team to actually reduce the staff there. So the way we can do that using our modeling capabilities is I can just do a simple drag and drop to do reassignments of positions. So I'm going to be moving in and changing the reporting relationship, moving individuals into this new department. So here, production US, I can actually see how these measurements have updated here. So when I come in here and I'll zoom in just for a moment, you can see for Jeff Hill, notice that the total comp for his department and span has increased. He got a green up arrow. We also have some italicized numbers in orange to help them stand out, that we have changes in our headcount metrics. And I can also focus in, again, what data is important. For this change, we want to stay within our budgets. We can see here, for example, for Jeff Hill, we can see the increase in total comp and what that increment of increase is. Also, for person details for his team, we can see those KPI, headcount KPIs here at the bottom right as well. It's going to be the opposite for Russell Goddard. We moved individuals, we divested from his team until we perhaps put others in there. But here you can see the KPI for headcount has dropped. Total comp for the team has also dropped, as you see clearly here, at the same level as we increased for the other department since we moved individuals over. You could also come in and change attributes for any individual. So if you need to measure change, a typical example is for leaders and HR to be productive and successful with change. Typical examples would be, we need to increase the workforce in this area by 5%, or we want to model increasing salaries by 3% across the board. So those are things you can model out in very easy steps. So you can do what's called a mass change of data, very easy to do. But notice again, we're all doing it within the context of this org structure. And the org structure is really important because it helps us understand the overall focus of our organization. So very important indeed. You can even have unfunded positions that haven't been approved yet. You can set effective dates for new positions when they need to be filled by, which will help with the recruiting team. So again, the whole premise here is change is constant in organizations. And whether it's internal events that are ongoing or external events that happen to organizations, such as the pandemic, a clear example, or merger and acquisition, there can be clear outside influences and events that prompt change to an organization. And what we've talked about today here in a real simple, quick manner is some of those data points that are going to be really critical. What are those metrics? What are those analytics that are going to be important for us to focus in on? And it's absolutely critical to have measurable data so we know who our top talent is, their tenure with the company, job grade levels to make sure we have a balanced organization, headcount metrics to make sure we also, again, have a balanced structure in the organization. Do some parts of our organization go too deep with too many layers? Why did we do that? Those are things we want to be able to analyze around our org structure. And then when it's time to put our workforce plans and people strategy into action, how do you put those plans in action? That 3% increase in compensation, what's the impact of that financially? What about the 5% increase for sales to increase our headcount? What's that going to look like to our org structure? And where are we placing those positions? And what's that reporting structure going to look like? As you can see clear here from what I'm demonstrating, you can map out and rapidly prototype these changes. And most important of all, have these measurements available to you, these dashboards, if you will, to understand all the changes that are being proposed so they can be signed off on and put into action. So again, really critical to understand having an automated tool like this, bringing all this data together around your workforce plans. It's going to increase the company's productivity, the efficiency. We're going to be able to make decisions and execute our plans much faster by doing rapid prototyping and visual modeling, as easy as I'm doing here. We're going to be able to get through our models much more quickly and make informed business decisions much more quickly. And that's going to save us a lot of money end of the day as well. So just to wrap up quickly here, again, for what we've covered. So again, we've gone through the importance of organizational modeling and those data elements that are going to be important to help drive productivity and help drive change in the workforce. And again, I want to thank you. We do have a white paper at our virtual booth all around achieving organizational effectiveness through organizational modeling. I invite you to please download and check out the information, or I welcome an email if you'd like to reach out to me. Would love to hear from you. But I want to thank you again for watching this, and I hope it was helpful to you. Thank you so much again.